Good day, everyone. Welcome back to our lecture series on results, life, works, and writings. So, this is our second video. Now, the 19th century Philippines as results context. This is actually a fusion of two topics, which is the conditions of Europe, America, and Spain, then also the setting of the Philippines at that time, which impacted or has influenced or are affected also, which also influence how Jose Rizal's uh, view on certain events and why he is engaged in reform process at that time. Okay, so the 19th century Philippines as Rizal's context. This video is relevant to our objective, which is uh, the students are able to discuss the conditions of the Philippines in relevant to Europe, America, and Spain, as well as you're expected to appreciate and develop sense of nationalism. Okay? Now, the 19th century, you see, these are some pictures in the 19th century. Okay? So, you see the clothings, mga dress nila. That's how the Filipino at that time used these dresses. Okay? You see the kalesa there. Oh, the house, no? The buildings, the church. Okay? So these are all influenced by the colonizer. Class, Spain had ruled or Spain held control the Philippines for almost 300 years, more than 300 years, or 333 years to be exact. Okay? Now, the 19th century was the era of challenges and responses. It is the period of major changes that affect man and society. During the last 2 decades of the previous century, the age of Enlightenment reached its zenith in France, culminating in the French Revolution of 1789. Now, in this age, the idea of freedom, the ideas of freedom, liberty, and equality, and the belief that sovereignty is with the people, uh, and sovereignty is not in one person who is a monarch or the king or the queen. Okay? Now, this belief had conflagrarized the Europe, even the America, as well as it also affect the Spain. Because of that, uh, there was revolution. No? By the way, we will discuss these conditions of Europe, America, and Spain, and relate this to the Philippine setting. However, we will divide the we will come up with three contexts. Okay, the political context, the economical context, and the socio-cultural context. Now, politically, in the Philippines, there is a struggle of nationalism, as well as in Europe, Americas, and Spain. Now, the French Revolution in France is happening. While it's happening in France, there is also an American Civil War. Okay. Now, what is this French Revolution, which culminated in 1789? The French Revolution resulted in the toppling of the monarchy of King Louis XVI and giving the birth to the French Republic. Okay. Unfortunately, After for several years, this French Republic backslide, no? So originally from monarchy to a French Republic, but later it backslide to another form of monarchy. And this is now the Napoleon Bonaparte's French Empire. Okay? So sabi ng iba, Bonaparte. Okay, whatever you like. Okay? Ganun na lang. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte uh, restored the Bourbon dynasty. Bourbon is Bourbon. Okay? Bourbon dynasty. So in other words, uh, the French Revolution initially brought the concept that the sovereignty lies in the people, not on one person, but later it backslide back again to monarchy. However, what is wonderful at this period are several ideas on liberalism and other philosophies introduced by the following. Okay, so we have philosophers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We have also like Montesquieu. Then we have also Frances Francois Marie Auriet. Okay, you see, Francois or Franco. Yung silent S kasi dapat, di ba? Franco Marie Auriet, or better known as Voltaire. And of course, an English writer, the name of John Locke. So their ideas spread around the world like conflagration. Because of this, the world was never the same again. Okay. Earlier I said, well, it's happening in France, there is a French Revolution. There is another also struggle that is happening in America. Now in America, uh, Abraham Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln is a president of United States of America at that time. Okay? So in the United States, President Abraham Lincoln emancipated the black. Because of this, it triggered civil war that lasted from 1861 to 1865. Now, what is striking is in 1861, that was actually the birth of our national hero. Yes, Dr. Jose Rizal was born on June 19, 1861. Okay. Now, it was also the year where Tsar Alexander II emancipated Russian serf. Okay. This year also, the Italians under Giuseppe Garibaldi threw out the Austrians and took over the Papal lands. Italians, no, nationalism also ended the domination of the church. So the Italians unified various Italian states and they come up with one Italy, okay? Italian as a country. So this is actually now a war between conservatism versus liberalism. So before, conservatism are very strong, but there arose a new concept now, the liberalism. In Spain, there was the split among the intellectuals into two irreconcilable camps, the conservatives and the liberals, neither of which advantage adequate practical solutions to end all strives. Alright? Now, still in terms of governance, in almost all colonies, or rather, in all colonies of Spain, to include the Philippines, the rule of the priors, mga padre, no? No? So, friars have greater influence in the governance. So we call this the phylocracy. No? Phylocracy. So later mababasa natin uh, sa Noli Me Tangere, even sa Il Filibusterismo, how the fraile or the friars are being illustrated by Dr. Jose Rizal. Now, back to Spain, there is what we call now the political structure during the Spanish colonial period. Okay. So in Spain, the king has the sole authority over the colonial government. Okay. Now during the Napoleon's time, Spain was part of France alliance against Great Britain in the continental system. Okay. Now what is this continental system? Now, if we are to read history, uh, so there is France alliance and there is Great Britain. Okay? So these two factions are having control over the sea. Okay? Now, the Great Britain have a superpower, I would say, in terms of their navy. So, while that is true to Great Spain, so Napoleon Bonaparte conceptualized a solution and he called this the continental system. Meaning, if you are member of the France alliance, no, either you are a neutral country or you are allied to France, you are not supposed to engage with trading with the Great Britain. So in that way, uh, France can advance ahead against its competitor, the Great Spain, in terms of resources generation. Siyempre, kung no one will buy the goods from from Great Britain, so there is problem on more demand, more supply but less demand. Okay. Now, however, this faltered. Why? Because the Great Britain also uh, come up with their own solution against that. So the Great Britain have a blockade. No? So they blockade. They control the sea. Okay? So in other words, uh, kasi this is what happening. Uh, if the gal I mean the ship passes through the Great Spain and goes to a France allied country, that ship will be confiscated by the French allied government. So there is really a problem, no? There are times that there are neutral countries attempted to continue trading with Great Spain. So resulted to the that solution, no? Confiscation. If your ship passes through Great Britain, when you return home, your ship will be confiscated. Now, this definitely will hinder the Great Britain economy. So, what the Great Britain responded is the blockade. So, meaning your European ship cannot also enter my territory, the sea. So, you cannot therefore trade from one country to another country. Because, at that time, there are still no, what's this, land transportation, mass transportation for bringing goods from one country to another country. So, the best route is by sea. So, Great Britain controlling the sea will also hamper the France. So this faltered. No? When this alliance faltered, so there is what we call the France alliance. So it faltered because some country did not succumb, did not support the idea of Napoleon Bonaparte. So Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808. So he did invaded Spain and installed his brother Joseph as the king. Now at that time, the Spaniard resisted the French, and the Spanish patriots declared allegiance to their prince. Oh, may prince sila, prinsipe. So, and Prince Ferdinand, for no, they swear allegiance to Prince Ferdinand. And they gathered, no, those Spanish patriots, they gathered in the city of Cadiz, and they come up, or they crafted a constitution known as the Cadiz Constitution. Now, what is novel in this Cadiz Constitution is having a Spanish parliament. This Spanish parliament, which is called as the Cortes, so they are a, a body that have the powers to discuss issue and problems and the manner of governing a certain country, which is actually the Spain. Now, initially, uh, Joseph as the king, which is the French, the French supported, and there is also another, which is Ferdinand as a king of the Spain, which is supported by the Spanish patriots. Okay. Now, going back to the Cadiz Constitution, as I said earlier, noble to it is the institution of the Spanish Parliament or the Cortes. Now, at that time, there is a representation of the colony of the Philippines in the person of Ventura de los Reyes. Ventura de los Reyes is actually a Spaniard who was born in the Philippines. He was selected to represent the colony. However, Napoleon was defeated. So when Napoleon was defeated, Ferdinand, who became King Ferdinand VII, he abolished the Cortes or the Spanish Parliament. Now, he said that body, that Spanish Parliament, encroached the power of the monarchy, because the absolute power of the monarchy belonged only to the king. So the decision was unpopular. Being so, several colonies went into revolution. Most of the colonies, such as those in South and Central America, revolted, such as Mexico, Chile, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, and other had won their independence from Spain through revolution. Okay. Now, still in this concept of political change, political context, the liberal steerings from Europe also reached the Philippines. So while there are revolutions in South and Central America, to include Mexico, there is also revolution right in our country in that time, in the 19th century. Okay? So in the Ilocos, Leading citizens, they're called Kaelanes, refused to believe that the Cadiz Constitution was abolished by King Ferdinand, and they rose up in revolt. No? So they were, however, they were crushed by the troops from other provinces. In 1826, Mexican soldiers led by Lieutenant Andres Novales mutinied. They complained of discrimination and unfair treatment from the peninsular officials following the independence of Mexico from Spain. So, however, the mutineers tried to rally the Filipinos to gain their support, and they promised to fight for the independence of the Philippines. However, the mutiny was crushed and the rebels were executed. Now, but several revolution took place in the Philippines, no, from then and then. And the last of the series of the revolts took place in 1841 to 1842 when Apolinario de la Cruz, okay, he refused to disband his religious organization, the Confradia de San Jose. Okay, Confradia de San Jose. Now, De La Cruz, who aspired to become a priest, but being a Filipino, is not being recognized due to racial discrimination. However, he continued preaching, he continued his advocacy. He, so he gained popularity from the masses. Now, this was seen to be a threat by the Catholic Church. So, there was prosecution on the on Cofradia. So, there was prosecution on Cofradia. And the suppression of the Confradia, members of by the Tayabas regiment of the Spanish Army, who turned out to be province mate of De La Cruz. So they mutinied and almost took over Manila. The arrival of the native reinforcement saved the Spaniards, colonizer, from defeat. Okay. Now, if we are trying to study this colonial government class, you will notice that there are two branches, no? The executive branch and the judicial branch. Now, both are headed by Governor General. In other words, the colonial government is under the authority of the Governor General. He had power over the executive branch and the judicial branch. The judicial branch also composed of royal audiencia, residencia, and lower courts. Okay? While the colonial government is divided into three, we have the provincial government, municipal government, and the city government. Okay? Now, this provincial government, there are pueblos or towns. Then these towns or pueblos is also consists of the barrios. Okay? So, the head of each government is written there. Now, why the revolution in the Philippines failed? If you would, as I said, if we are to study the conceptual paradigm or the the framework of the government of the colonial government of Spain in the Philippines, you could just imagine that there are only few Spaniards, right? There are only few Spaniards. In fact, in one province, in one big province, the only Spaniards is or are the parish priest and the head of the police. The rest are natives. Oh, even the composition of the local Spanish army and the civil guards was largely native. Only the officials with the rank of sergeant and above are the Spaniards. Okay? But it's still, with this inferior number, the political structure during Spanish colonial period remains stable. Huh? Yes, it remains stable. So the defeat of the revolts demonstrated that the Philippines was disunited. Yun. And the cause of this disunity is because of the lack of identity. So, this lack of identity, which is the cause of disunity, was being utilized or capitalized by the Spaniards. No? So, they capitalize on this. So, they come up with divide and rule. Oh, yun. Divide and rule. So, they divided the Filipinos into several segments of the population. And all of these segments, they have quite good control. Okay? So, the first group is we have Filipinos or Indios who are elected into several office, like alcalde mayor, corregidor, ayuntamiento, members of the regodores alguacil, no? Mayor escribando. We have also the cabeza de barangay, the teniente de municipal, no? And the kapitan de municipal. Okay? So these are exalted position. ah, Exalted position. But you know, class, even this exalted position, yet the salary is small. However, even the salary is small, many Filipinos are running into election to in order to hold these offices. Now, even your term has expired, you can continue you can be eligible for re-election. So it was possible for former officials to be reinstated into their former offices several times. So this explains why Spanish controlled the Philippines for more than 300 years, or 333 years to be exact. Spain controlled the natives through the native leaders. Okay. Later, when we talk of economy, we will look into how the Spain controlled the native leaders. Okay. Uh, so we are now ready in the economics context. Okay. Oh, that's in in the far place, not in the Philippines. Most probably this is in France or in Spain. Okay, so the labor, the transportation, okay, the production and communication, the production and communication, uh, they substituted from manual labor to the machine, but not in the Philippines. Okay? Ayan. In the Philippines, even in other part of the colony of Spain, the encomienda to hacienda is still existing. Okay. What is this encomienda to hacienda? Encomienda and hacienda systems. The labor systems developed by Spain, granting large amount of land to settlers in Americas and even in the Philippines, and claiming ownership of all the resources and of the natives. The encomienda and hacienda system developed by an exchange among the natives for work in return for protection and education. No. So we have the encomendero. Who are these encomendero? These are actually men who conquered the Philippines. So the encomienda was not actually a land grant, but was a favor from the king. What kind of favor? The Spaniards who received this favor was given the right to collect tributes or taxes from the inhabitants of the area assigned to him. Okay. Okay. Now, I said earlier that changes in the 19th century had a profound effects to the Philippines, also in terms of its economy. Okay? So, during the previous years, it was forbidden for the Philippines to trade with other countries because of Spain monopolistic policy or the mercantilism. But colonial officials ignored this instruction and traded with other nations. Okay? So even there is a prohibition, but the the officials in the Philippines, they still traded with other nations. So they ignored the instruction of not to allow to be trade. Now by 1834, the mercantilist policy of not allowing the Philippines to trade with other countries was scrapped with the opening of Manila to other ports. No? So for Manila to go into trading. Okay, so we call this the Manila Acapulco galleon trade. Okay, so the Manila Acapulco galleon trade was the main source of the colony during early years. No? Service was inaugurated in 1565 and continued into the early 19th century. Now, what are the transactions in the galleon trade? So the galleon trade brought silver from New Spain and silk from China by way of Manila. So this way, the Philippines earn its income through buy and sell. That is, they bought silk from China for them to resell it to New Spain and then bought American silver for resale to China. So that is the Manila Acapulco galleon trade. Okay. Now, there are other ports that sprouted after some years of this galleon trade. So there are ports in Iloilo, Cebu, Sual, Pangasinan, and Zamboanga City followed. Right? So there was a brisk demand of the Philippine products such as sugar, coffee, abaca, tobacco, dyestuffs, and the rice. So this is highly demanded in other province. That's why when uh, this galleon trade was opened, so they some of the uh, mestizos able to gain way how to improve their life and gain money at this time. Okay, so their children were brought to school, especially in tertiary education. But still, let's go back to the galleon trade, the economy, the economical context. Okay, so there is what we call the indulto de comercio. Uh, so this privilege of provincial governors to engage in and monopolize the trade. So the provincial governors have these powers at hand. So who wants to change the government when you have that powers? So in other words, uh, the governors have enjoyed this privilege indulto de comercio. You see. Ayan. Now, the principales or the descended from the loyal datus who pledged their allegiance to the colonizers, They were also exempt from taxation and community labor or prestasyon personal, or we call it POLO y servicio. The POLO servicio is the forced labor for 40 days. Okay? If your age is ranging from 16 to 60 years old, so you are to do a polio labor or polio y servicio. So one could be exempted from polo by paying the falla and a day fine of 1.5 real. So, but in 1884, the labor was reduced to 15 days. So the polo system was actually patterned after the Mexican repartimiento selection for forced labor. Okay? So to support the colony, several forms of taxes and monopolies were imposed. And this is also one way how to attract the navy to maintain their allegiance, their support. Okay? So the principales or the those who descended from the loyal datus who pledged their loyalty to the colonizers because they are what? The tribute is the tax or rent given to the landlord a resident is under. It may be in cash or in kind like tobacco, chicken, products, gold, blanket, cotton, rice, etc. depending on the regions of the country. Fixed at 8 reales and later increased to 15 reales. Okay. Now, there is another taxes. We call this the sanctorum. This is a tax being paid as a support to the church. So we have titi, uh, the tribute or the buwis, and we have the force. No? We have also the buwis, no? The titi, the taiti. The taiti is the payment of the 10% of an individual's annual income to the government. Okay? Now, going back to the revolution that is happening in other countries and they were successful, but the revolts in the Philippines was not successful. So we said earlier the reason is this unity among Filipinos. There is lack of nationalism. There is lack of identity. There's lack of identity. Yon. So this sociocultural context related to the different groups of people in society and their habits, tradition, and beliefs. Okay. So we have the Indios. These Indios are the local, no? The local, the original Filipino, no? The Aborigine. Next, we have after the Indios, we have the Chinese. So Chinese are people who came from China and stayed in the Philippines. Then we have Chinese mestizos. So basically, these are principalia who got who get relationship with the birds, with the Chinese rather, yung mga Chinese mestizo. So there are intermarriage between Filipino and Chinese. So the result, their siblings are Chinese mestizo. Then we have also the principales. Okay, the principales. These are actually they descended from the loyal datus. Now, so instead fighting the king or instead fighting the rule of the Spain, they what? They were taken as advisor. So thus they are entitled to certain portion uh, of the collection from the people. After serving their terms of office, former officials will still eligible for re-election. So it was possible for former officials to be reinstated in their former office several times. Okay? So this explains why Spain controlled Philippines for more than 300 years. How the Spain controlled the natives through the native leaders. Claro? Okay. Then we have the Spanish mestizo. Who are this Spanish mestizo? Okay, those are Principalia who got married to the Filipino, the Indios. So we have the Spanish mestizo. Then we have the Insulares. Then we have the Peninsulares. Okay. Now, I said earlier there are intermarriage between Indios and Spanish mestizos or even Spanish. So because of these changes in the landscape, the social landscape of the UK, so there was this mga katiwala, no, accompanying Filipinos for trade, usually are farmers now, but they are related to the traders. So they intermarried with natives who were farmers and that became traders. So in the process, they became more affluent and formed the nucleus of the middle. So those mga mestizos. So the increased wealth allowed uh, middle class families to have better houses and their children are sent to quite expensive education. So the increased wealth allowed middle class to have better houses and education degree, which they have thought made them equal of the Spaniards. Eventually, they have become concerned with the issues on equality, including secularization. So by the end of Rizal's youth, the quest for equality was the cry of the times. It influenced final theological thought of his life and it became his lifelong quest. Okay? Now, going back to the conditions of the Philippines, now what is also the conditions in Asia in the 19th century? In Asia, there were renewed efforts of European penetration with the weakening of Spain and Portugal and the rise of Great Britain and France. So the British gained the colony in Hong Kong and forced China to open the five ports to its traders following China's defeat in the Opium War of 1839 and to 1842. China was humiliated uh, with another defeat in the Arrow War in 1856 to 1858 when the British, now joined by the French, forced China to open the whole country to foreigners. So furthermore, Great Britain enlarged its colony in Hong Kong by taking over Colon. Okay, Colon. Japan was forced over the Americans under the Commodore Matthew Perry in 1854. Unlike the Chinese, however, the Japanese were able to parry Western requests to make suppression in the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. So Burma became a colony of Great Britain and their Burmese wars in 1824 to 26, 1862 to 1863, and 1865 to 1886. No? Near the Philippines, Indochina became protectors of this following the suppressions of the kingdom of Anan and Cochin China. So Filipino troops from Manila played a role of the conquest of Indo-China to France. So Malaysia became a protectorate and eventually a colony of Great Britain, while Indonesia was conquered by the Dutch of Netherlands. Okay? Now, still in the socio-cultural context, so in 1885, the year Spain realized the need of establishing a system of public education for the indios. So because there are already private education for the non-indios. No? So this was also the year that Governor General Crespo organized a commission and recommended remedial measures to improve elementary education. Now, in 1861, again, 1861 was the birth of our national hero. The year also is the commission completed its report and forwarded to Spain. So very, very, very important the date, no, 1861. In 1863, the year that the educational decree of 1863 was issued. Okay, so this is the Philippine educational system during the Spanish time. Now, what is the provision of Educational Decree of 1863? One is the establishment of a teacher training school. Second, government supervises the public school system. Third, the use of Spanish as a medium of instruction in all schools. Fourth, establishment of primary schools for boys and girls in each major town. So these are the provision, the summary of the provision of Educational Decree of 1863. Now, uh, with some Filipinos who have nice nice experience in wealth accumulation by way of trading, so they able to accumulate wealth. When we say wealth, money, so they were able to send their child to good institution in the Philippines and even in abroad. Okay, so the increased wealth therefore allowed the creation of a new category, which is the middle class families. They have to have better houses and send their children to colleges and universities for tertiary education. Who are they? The middle class. Very good. Okay. So this middle class able to obtain higher educational degree, which they thought made them equal with the Spaniards. Eventually, they became concerned with the issues of equality, including speculations. By the time of Rizal's suit, the quest for equality was the cry of the time. It influenced Rizal thought to this life and become his lifelong quest. Now, on the socio-cultural context on the effects of educational system during the Spanish, these are the evaluation made. No? Emphasis on religion. Fear of God was emphasized. Obedience to prayer was instilled in the mind of the people. Jews were constantly reminded that they have inferior intelligence and were fit for manual labor only. Okay, so number four is will of God was also emphasized. So these are seemingly a wonderful uh, globes, but uh, so the emphasis on religion. Next is the absence of academic freedom. Most schools were not open to the natives. Students were not allowed to express their opinion. So will be declared uh, rebels. So racial discrimination is also rampant. Prior to educational decree of 1863, the schools were not open to the natives. Spaniards hesitated to consider the Indios as educable as themselves. So it's difficult for us to be educated according to Spaniel. Now, there's also limited curriculum. The education was limited to the 3 R's, that is reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay? Now, the Philippines of Rizal's time. During the time of Rizal, the sinister shadow of the Spain decadence darkened the Philippine skies. The Filipino agonized beneath the yoke of Spanish misrule, for they were unfortunate victims of the evils of an unjust, bigoted, and deteriorating colonial power. Among these evils were as follows. Okay, just look at it. So there are six. Very good. So this is the first one. Evils of the unjust colonial power. That is instability of colonial administration. The post of the Governor General is dependent on the whim of the enforcer. There are also corrupt officials, officials per se. No Philippine representation in the Spanish Cortes. Yan. No? Nanonood kayo nito. Then the human rights denied to Filipinos. Okay? No equality before the law. There's also maladministration of justice, especially during the next monarch, a female one. The Queen Elizabeth II. Okay. So there's racial discrimination, philocracy, forced labor or the POLO is servicio, the hacienda owned by the priors, and the Guardia Civil. Okay, let me drink my coffee. Thank you. So thank you for listening. So we were able to discuss the conditions of Europe, America, and Spain at the context of Rizal's time. Hopefully, you also appreciate some important details. No, thank you.